One of the really great things about mental ray is that it can bounce light. We can bounce light in other places, if you'd like, for example, to use the light tracer or radiosity in the scanline renderer. But mental ray gives us a far superior image of our designs. What I'll do is open up those render settings, and I'll also look at my rendered frame window where I had rendered out the last image. In here, we can see that my final gather is limited down, a little bit dark under that roof, but I've taken down the time to 1/16 a frame for a half-size rendering, so I'll see it come up by 4 times that, or roughly 530 we'll call it, per frame, which is still not bad. Now I'm going to overcrank my final gather a little bit. What we can do then is, in addition to saying how do we limit final gather, we can decide to push it a little bit more, emphasizing the bounce lighting in the scene. What I'm going to do is in the render settings, scroll down and bring up that stop distance just a little bit more, maybe 450. Then what I'll do is in the final gather, I'll click on both the color and tint the final gather and multiply it. I'll click on the color and I'll put in just the littlest bit of warmth in there, backing off green and blue just a little bit so I get the tiniest bit of a warm orange. Then I'll put in a multiplier of 2 initially, and we'll see a radical difference in the look of this image. What we're seeing in here is that everything now has that littlest bit of a soft warmth to it, even more so than it did from the daylight. And in places where I've got bounce light, it's really bouncing with a little extra power between surfaces. I'm going to push this up a little more and try an experiment by turning off that fall-off distance. I'll hit Escape, turn off Use Fall-Off, and try rendering again. With the fall-off off, we can see in here that we're getting that light back in the canopy over the driveway again. And truth be it, I could probably play with that fall-off distance, but I like the look of this one better. More importantly, what I like out of here is that multiplier really emphasizes the bounce of light in the scene, that I'm getting a definite difference in the lighting, where the light is hitting all of those white surfaces, and it's getting a little more softer and more luminous. We want to use that final gather color and multiplier then to really push around our lighting, because it gives us the ability then to say, how is that light bouncing? Not just is it bouncing, but is it luminous and soft and reaching into all the corners, or is it a little heavier and scared to go in some places? Depending on the quality we want in our rendering, we have a lot of options. I'll also turn on my global illumination and see how that plays into the quality of this image. I'll turn on my photon mapping, and in here I have the same kind of controls. A number of photons per sample, a radius if we need, merging of photons, and optimizing for final gather. In addition, I've got a multiplier and a tint. I'll try a straight render with just GI on and see how it looks. Initially, with global illumination on, aside from seeing it process, we're not seeing too much of a difference. There's not enough strength in it yet. Where it gets really neat then is when we start to crank up both multipliers and really let that light bloom on the surfaces. We are seeing a little bit more color on the inside, and some of that is bouncing out to the outside. I'll push this up by increasing that multiplier once more of this image is done and I get a good idea of what it's going to look like. It's working nicely. I'll hit Escape because I don't really need to see the plants rendered again, and I'm going to push up the multiplier in my GI to 2, and I'm also going to push up my final gather to 3. I'll render one more time, and as a note in this, we can reuse our geometry if we need. We can also reuse the final gather, but as I'm changing it, I'm not going to check this. What this does is, when we render, caches that geometry, and then holds it, so instead of reloading it, it simply recalls it. I'll hit render one more time and see how it behaves. With a little extra push in the GI and final gather, it's really getting a soft look to it, and that light is really showing. I'll also go through and check and make sure there's no lights bleeding out through surfaces. It does feel a little bit bright on the roof right here over the other roof, and so I'll make sure I check that. However, there's a great softness going on the soffits right underneath that roof, and we get a very warm feel from this. The lights are really showing nicely, and cranking up that global illumination and final gather to stylize the image is really helping.